We are ready.
I don't recall whether I said this when we began the year last week, but originally when I wrote the Skuntas, which was not printed yet, I hope it'll be in Minchas Osher Shalas Tshuvas Chelik Daled, I started off with the Posuk, Anoisen Liuv Koyach Ula'ein Oinam Otzmu Yarba. Koyach is Chov Ches, and I wrote that in this contrast I will quote 28 sources. Last week, when I went over the sugya again, I needed to change the posuk, and the new posuk was Gal Einai va'abitu neflois mitoirosecho, and I wrote we will relate 33 sources. Today, I needed to update the posuk once again. So in the present version, the posuk will be Lu chachma yaskilu zois, which is 36. If it's going to go beyond that, I might not have a posuk. So, yes, posuk, no posuk. The ikar is Yagdol Torah V'Yavya. So last week in our previous year, we saw that the B'Yosef bases various different Piskei Halacha in Shulchan Aruch and the Zohar. And we also saw that the tradition of Ashkenazi poskim is a different tradition, and the Ramo writes clearly, we don't paskin in accordance to the Zohar and Kabbalah. Our psak is based only on halachic sources, Gemara and poskim. I apologize, one moment. I think the lighting system isn't good right here. Just one moment. I hope this is better. So, in the first two sources on our sheet today, what I want to prove is, even in the B'Yosef Sashkofa, it is not very clear cut. Simachov Hey Ois Hey. The question is one bracha or two brachas when we put on tefillin. You are all aware that Sephardim say one bracha, Ashkenazim two brachas. And that is in Shulchan Aruch, Simachov Hey, Siv Hey. The Torah brings, that's the machlekes. The Rif and the Rambam say one bracha, Tosfos and the Rosh say two brachas. The B'Yosef quotes the Ogur, Sefer HaOgur. V'zeh l'shoinoi. V'ani machava metzosi v'sefer hazohar Parshas Pinchas. Ma'amar de Reb Shimon ben Yochai de'ein levorech al shneim ela brocha achas. V'zeh l'shoinoi. It's a fascinating Zohar. I would suggest let's learn it. Tefillin inun al moicho lekaval zochoyo, v'tefillin de deroyo l'smolo al libei lekaval shomoyo. So, first of all, the Zohar says, and it makes so much sense, so much logic, not only al pi KABBALAH, because Zohar is in your mind. It's about memory. It's about remembering, focusing. So Tefillin Sharash is Zohar. Shomar is abstaining from do malachas. A man creates Choresh, Zoreya, Koitzer, Koisev, Moichik, Mavir, Mechaba. He does all that with his hands. And that is why Tefillin Shel Yad is Shomer. And now the Zohar says, Zochar v'Shomer b'dibar echod nemro, af hoche brocha achas litarveyu. So that's the Zohar. And now the Sefer HaOgur says, Vani tamati. One line down. Al HaRav Rabbi, Hachol Kamar Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Im hayu sheyadu ma'amer zeh, u'makol mokom ha'olam nahag levorech shtayim. Now the B'Yosef says, Ein yodea lama tamei al zeh Yosef mekama dinim shemetzono, shekosef Reb Shimon ben Yochai b'sefer hazohar hefach memaskone de Talmuda, ve'en haposkim kosef mele maskone de Talmuda. אפילו אם היו יודעים דברי רב שמעון יחוי, לא היה בחי שלהם, במקום דפליגת תלמוד דדן. So the Beis Yosef wonders, why does the ogre wonder? Our minig is to paskin according to the Gemara and Paiskim, not according to the Zohar, which seems somewhat to contradict the previous two sources we had in our shir last week. Kriyas HaTorah, Tefillin Chalamoyed. The Beis Yosef clearly paskins according to the Zohar. Now, let me make this clear. The psak of the Beis Yosef regarding one bracha coincides with the Zohar, but it's not based on the Zohar, rather on the Rif and the Rambam. Now, the Beis Yosef always follows the footsteps of the Rif and the Rambam. That's the Sephardi tradition. The Ramo, the Ashkenazi, follows Tosfos and the Rosh. They were Gedolei Ashkenaz. The Beis Yosef writes, in our sugya, Rashi, first and foremost amongst Gedolei Ashkenaz, Rashi paskins like the Rif and the Rambam, one brocha, and that is why I say one brocha. So this psak coincides with the Zohar, but it is clearly not based on the Zohar. Next source, and this is fascinating. Source number 2. Hilchas Tefillin, we're still in Hilchas Tefillin. Yesh mi shekosev laniach shel yad miyushav v'shel roish me'umad. What's the source? Ogul b'shem HaZohar. This is not the Mechaber. This is not the Shulchan Aruch. This is the Ramah. The Shulchan Aruch, the Zohar, totally ignores the Zohar. Ubemedinas elu lo yinagu kein ele shteyen me'umad. It's dafka the Ramah quoting the Zohar and rejecting the Zohar. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring them at all. And this brings us to a fascinating question that we will address in a few minutes. Last week, all we spoke about is Zohar against Gemara and Paiskim. Today, we will deal with the question, what do we do when the Ariya Kodesh and the Zohar are on two different sides? But we're not there yet. So I don't know why the Beis Yosef in this halacha ignores the Zohar. But the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah are on the same page. You put on tefillin while standing. The Ramah calls the Zohar shel yad sitting. You're probably aware. Today, all the Sfardim put on shel yad seated and shel rosh standing. It's against the Shulchan Aruch. But it is the Birkei Yosef, the Chidah, based on the Zohar. Next source, Chacham Tzvi. So I like to give my Talmidim a bit of history. LeHollandia, year Tov Samach Vav Liyatzir. So the tshuva was written to Holland. Interesting. The Chacham Tzvi was actually in Amsterdam in his later years, which is Holland. But before that, he was the Rav in Altona, which is Germany. So the tshuva seems to be written to Holland. Shnayim shebo lebeis hakneses v'shol shachas anoy b'psuka d'zimra. Hu echad dilek b'psuka d'zimra al derech hu omer b'paiskim kedei l'spala l'makor. V'shein yetchila metchilas berchas ha'shacha v'hoy mishabeach v'omer al ha'seida v'lo yitpalel l'makor ba'omroi shekach das Rashbi b'zoya parshas b'midbar. So the Chacham Tzvi asked, who was right? So the Chacham Tzvi says yes. According to the Zohar, you never skip. And that is also the Ariya Kodesh. Because to say that a tefillah is based on the Daled Olamis, Asiya, Bria, Yetzira, Atzilus. So in all the Kabbalah Sidurim, it is clear what part is Asiya, then when we transform to Bria, Shmoyne Esa, Tefillah Samida, which is the height of the Tefillah, is Kedeged Olam Atzilus. And therefore, you can't skip. However, the Chacham Tzvi writes, Shulchan Aruch Simenun Beis says, if you come late, you should skip. So once again, the Beis Yosef doesn't coincide with the Zohar. And the Beis Yosef doesn't quote the Zohar. So this is the second source in which we find a contradiction between the Zohar and Beis Yosef. Was it because the Beis Yosef wasn't aware of the Zohar? Maybe. Maybe. The Zohar was first publicized 120 years before the days of the Beis Yosef. I don't know whether you are aware of that. The Zohar was first Nizgala 700 years ago. That's why most of the Rishonim didn't have the Zohar. The Ramban was one of the greatest Mekabolim of his era. Not even once does he quote the Zohar. The Zohar was first made public 700 years ago. So it shouldn't be a wonder if the Beis Yosef didn't have the entire Zohar. But this is the second halacha in our session tonight in which the Beis Yosef is against the Zohar. The Beis Yosef says, with great detail, Siman Nun Beis Shulchan Aruch, we can have it on our screen, but it's not on my sheet. Siman Nun Beis Yif Aleph, if you come late to shul, exactly what you should skip. But let's have a look at the Chacham Tzvi. Tshuva. Ein medivri arash b'raya למי שאיחר ובא בשעה שציבור מתפללים. כי הוא לא דיבר אלה בטעם וכוונת הסדר המסודר לנו בפיין שכנסת גדולה וכך מהתלמוד. בעצם, ורשיינה, ולכתחילה הוכח דינן. וכבר ביאר לנו ביוסר תלמידי הרב האלוקי, רבי יצחק אשכנזי, 14 רבעיהם כנגד 4 חילוקי עולמס, הלוי בספרוסם, אבל כל זה אינו עניין למסחר. דוודאי כולי עלמא מועדת תפי עודף לדלת כדי לסבר למצבר, וגם הרשב"י מחבב מאוד את תפילת הצבע בספר הזוהר. So the Chacham Tzvi argues that Rashbi also exalts the importance of Tefillah B'tzibur. So when the Zohar says you shouldn't skip, it is if you daven with the tzibur shouldn't skip, or if you daven b'yechidus, but you definitely should skip to have the benefit of Tefillah B'tzibur. So the Chacham Tzvi argues it is not necessarily a stira between the Zohar and the halacha, but still, I still say it's a pele that the Beis Yosef doesn't quote the Zohar. The Beis Yosef should be the one to teach us. It is important not to be medalik, but if that is the only way to have Tefillah B'tzibur, it's what you should do. So the first part of this tshuva, the Chacham Tzvi writes, the one that skipped is the one that had it right. We should adhere to the Shulchan Aruch. Especially, it doesn't necessarily contradict the Zohar. Here we are. In Bola Beis HaKnesses v'Mosek Tzibah b'Soif Psikut HaZimra. Oimer, Baruch Shomer Ad Mora B'Tishbochos. V'yachikach Tila L'Dovet. V'yachikach Hallelujah Hashem. And the Mechana goes into great detail. If he has some more time, then he says another perek or two. And the Beis Yosef doesn't quote the Zohar. He doesn't speak at all about the importance of Tefillah Lefi HaSeder. Let's go back to the Chacham Tzvi. I just wanted you to have the feeling and have a look at the Sif in Shulchan Aruch about Dilug. So now we go back to the Chacham Tzvi, our previous source. And after the Chacham Tzvi writes, we should adhere to the Shulchan Aruch. He has a lengthy discussion about derech hapsak. Tzorech ani lahodia l'shoyer. You have it? The yellow lines, first section, 3 lines from the bottom. Tzorech ani lahodia l'shoyer. Here we are. She'afilu em hoyu divrei hazohar hefech me'apoiskim lo haya lanu laniach divrei hapoiskim b'shvat dvorim ha'amurim b'sitri Torah. כי אין לנו בדינם והרועס העסק בין הסטורס, זו לזה במוקם שיש מחלוקת הפויסקים, אז נוכל לסמך על הכרועס הזוהר, וכן תוזר רב דוד בן זמרה. That's the tshuva we had last week. And now comes the punchline. Divrei kabol, אם לא היה פלוגתא, שאם לא, וזה יסוד תורתנו הקדושה. We always follow the poskim. שאם לא כן, נתת תורס כל אחד ואחד בידוי, Leilach HaRav Nosei b'Sefer HaZohar HaTov Ohi Imro uBevoynisei Nisharabo Ze Sibel HaPirtzes Gedoyla Asher Einai Ra'u V'Lo Zar Kama Anoshim Avru Toras Cholfu Choik Beisamchom Al Divrei HaZohar. What the Chacham Tzvi is referring to now is not only the Messiahs, the tradition of Gedolei Ashkenaz, the Ramah and the Mashal. What is he referring to is Shabtai Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi was young, but he did experience and he did see the devastation of the Mashiach HaSheker. And the Frankists were very active in the days of the Chacham Tzvi, and very much so in Holland. I don't know whether you know the history of the Tkufa, but the greatest loichem, and the very first one, Godel B'Yisrael, that identified Shabtai Tzvi and all those messianic movements as Tumah, was the Yankov Sasportas, and he was in Holland. He was the Godel in Holland, and he was the first that waged war against the messianic movement of Shabtai Tzvi. And this is what the Chacham Tzvi is referring to. It's not only the tradition of Psak Halacha of Gedolei Ashkenaz, but those movements based all their warped teachings on the Zohar, and the new interpretation of the Zohar. And they said, a KABBALAH to bring Mashiach, you need to be over on Avera Lishma. And that is why the Chacham Tzvi is so adamant and so powerful arguing, we don't paskin in according to Nistar, only Negla. And now I want to briefly discuss Ari HaKadosh, vice versa, Shulchan Aruch. Because all the sources we brought up to this point deal with the Zohar. And now we move down in the generations. What we discussed up to now was Zohar against Poskim, Zohar against Gemara, Zohar against Rishonim. Now, Ari HaKadosh against Shulchan Aruch. Memvav, Kol HaBrachos ha'elu amroi nischayev b'yachas men kigon shelo yishma kol tanagol lo yholach v'lo ylovash v'lo ychogar oim aroisa brocha b'ni yizkoros Hashem. We're dealing with Berachos HaShachar. So the Shulchan Aruch writes based on the Gemara and Brachos. When you get up in the morning, there are many brachos to say. When you hear the rooster crowing, you say Anais Nesech V'Vino. You step down on the floor, you say Zokev Kefufim. You clean your eyes, you say Pekei Chevron. But our minig is to say all the brachos in one shot in the Beis HaKnesses v'tzibur. But the Shulchan Aruch says, if you skipped any of these phenomena, you don't say the bracha. So once upon a time, every average person heard the rooster crowing early in the morning because everybody had a mini zoo in his backyard. Some roosters, some hens, some ducks, 2 or 3 sheep, a goat or 2. If he was rich, he had a cow or 2 in his backyard. So everybody heard the rooster, but today nobody hears roosters in the morning. Not anyone that I know. I doubt that in Borough Park or in Flatbush or wherever you live, you hear the rooster early in the morning. So according to the says, you don't say a bracha. Birkei Yosef. Birkei Yosef is the chido. Maybe excluding the Bis Yosef, he was the most substantial figure in Sephardi Jewry. 200 years after the Bis Yosef, maybe even more. He was the Rav in Yerushalayim. So the Birkei Yosef says, our minig is Ari HaKadosh against Beis Yosef. We followed Ari HaKadosh. I don't recall whether we spoke about this last week. If we have last week's source sheet, if it doesn't complicate matters and it'll take us 10 seconds, I would like to go to last week's source sheet, Mem Vav, Siv Vav. Once again.
We have it, yes. We have it. We'll scroll down a second.
Of. No, down. We go down. Not up, down. Down. Substantially down. You could go fast. Down. No. So it's not an aspect.
That's it, Rebbe.
Okay. So anyway.
What is the Rav looking for? Which source?
Mevav, Sivav, whether we say Anoisen Leyoref Koyach, whether we say the bracha Anoisen Leyoref Koyach.
Let's see if we have it.
Sivav, we don't say this bracha because it's not in the Gemara. And the Birkei Yosef says, our minig is to say it because the Ariya Kodesh says we should say it. And
we have it on 1 second, page 5 or Pesach. Page 5, our master has the Shulchan Aruch and the Birkei Yosef right underneath it. So take this off and go back to, there you go. There you go, perfect.
Okay, here we are. So the Shulchan Aruch says, Yesh noegim levorach hanoisen of koyach ve'ein devrayim merim. The Rama says we do say it. Birkei Yosef. That's amazing. Yesh noegim levorach hanoisen of koyach ve'ein loima. Atun espashat aminik v'glin esene levorach zois abroch al pi kizve Rabbeinu Ari. Ki avde kibalnu aros moron kimlan de'il moron afhura adas kodesh Ari gamu yoida levorcho. So the Birkei Yosef writes, if the Beis Yosef would know the opinion of the Ari, he would bow down to the Ari and he would accept his ruling, which is amazing. Let me just explain. The Beis Yosef and the Ari were contemporaries, and they lived in the same little town in Tzfas. And Tzfas in those days wasn't a huge metropolis like New York or like present-day Yerushalayim. They knew each other. The Beis Yosef was 30 years older than the Ari. The Ari was a local. His acclaim and his renown he achieved after he passed away. The Beis Yosef was king of the world. The entire Jewish world, Memizrach u'Memarav, Mitzofan u'Miyam, everybody turned to the Beis Yosef. But the Birkei Yosef is confident. If the Beis Yosef would know the opinion of the Ari, so in Sephardi tradition, Kabbalah has tremendous weight. And the Birkei Yosef always paskins according to the Ari against the Beis Yosef. And we have 2 examples in Siman Mem Vav. First example is Anoisen Leyoref Koyach. Second example, do we say the bracha Anoisen L'Sech Levino even though we didn't hear the rooster? The Beis Yosef says no, without Shema Malchus. Birkei Yosef says yes, Al Pi HaAri. And now let's go back to my source sheet. And now I want to share with you something really fascinating, even beyond fascinating. Kiddush. I don't know whether you're baki in this sugi. Most Sidurim in the Nusach HaKiddush we have Tchilo Lemet. Kivona v'charta v'yasonu kadashta mikol u'ami. V'shabbos kodshcho b'hava v'rotzen and chatom. So, Reb Shlomo, do you see me? Because I only see you. Do you see me?
The Rav is perfectly visible and audible.
Okay, do you see this sefer? This is the Minchas Osher Zemiras Shabbos. So I want to open up Kiddush Leil Shabbos. So I'm just opening up Kiddush Leil Shabbos. I don't see myself on the screen, so I don't know whether this is audible or whether you could read this. But in my Zemiras, in Kiddush, we do find Kivona v'charto makol u'ami. Kivona v'charto v'yisanu kadashto makol u'ami. Let's have a look at Shara Kavana. It's number 6 on our sheet. Does that say the Kiddush? תחילה תוים הריום השישה ויחולו, אחר כך תוים מסברים הרונן, אורך התו השם אלוקינו מלך וילם בורא פרי הגופן, ואחר כך תוים הנוסח הקדש הזה. And he writes the Nusach HaKodesh. And he says, Kiddush is supposed to be 70 letters. Not more and not less. Ki yesh ayin teves v'seder v'yechulu v'seder Kiddush. Lama day teves v'yechulu, v'lama day teves v'Kiddush. V'lachen, oisam anoyeg em loy meres teves zech letzias fnaim kivona v'charto, Sona Kadashim Kalawamim, Veshavas Kodesh Chubavelos Anachtonu, Toyim Toas Gomu. Total mistake. Ki Mosifin B'Cheshbon HaTevis. And it comes from Kiddush and Yom Tov, and mistakenly, it found its way into Kiddush Shel Shabbos. The source of the Ariya Kodesh is the Zohar, source number 7. Source number 7, we scroll down. Boya banish lemaset sadu bechedva vreusa deliba lasuda kama morida mehimenusa. Kiddush is bearing testimony that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and this is a testimony we should say b'simcha gedola u'ba'avas alei. V'kol man demasadu v'yashva libe vreusa lido machaper al kol chavai. And when you say Kiddush with kavanah, it atones for all your avedas. Hai kedusha iu b'chad matka lelakavel sadusa demeimenusa ve'inon klosen v'chomish teven achronin kama de'izbei v'yechilu. We need to say 35 additional words besides the 35 of yechilu. Kula salken l'shivin teven. All in all, 70 words. Now, we already addressed many sugyas in which the poskim have one opinion, the Mekabolam have another opinion. But the Ariya Kodesh says that whoever says Kivona V'chartu is a big mistake, Toz Gomo. Well, let me share with you where this Nusach comes from. We only have a fraction of the sources on our page. Well, let's have a look at the Rambam. First of all, the Rambam. Zeh Nusach Kiddush Hayoim. Baruch Atu Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushonu b'mitzvot sevarot tzavona b'Shabbos kodesh b'Ha'ava v'lo sechanon. Skol HaMa'aseh Tchilan Mekor Kodesh Zechas Yisrael Kivona V'chartu v'Sona Kadash Mekol U'amim B'Shabbos kodesh b'Ha'ava v'lo sechanon. So what the Ariya Kodesh calls a mistake is the Rambam. Not only the Rambam, my dear friends. Do you know the earliest 2 Sidurim, which are the predecessors to all the others? Seder of Amram Goen, Machzor Vitri. These 2 Sidurim were composed in the days of the Goenim. All the others copy from them. And in both these Sidurim, we find Kivona V'chartu. Abu Daram. Abu Daram is the greatest commentary of Tefillah. Maharil, the father of Minhagi Ashkenaz. Rav Amram Goen, Vitri, Rambam, Abu Darham, Maharil, and all the others. But it doesn't coincide with the Zohar. And the Ariya Kodesh says it's a mistake. It should be in Yom Tov, not in Shabbos. How unreasonable is it to say Rambam, Abu Darham, Maharil, they were all confused. Rav Amram Goen, Machzor Vitri. The Magen Avraham, even though he always quotes the Ariya Kodesh, V'li nere, ein l'shana shum minig, ki l'kol minig yesh tam v'yesoy, doik b'tishkach, v'gam yesh loy mish hazoya kol medadai, al kiddush shel tefillah. Maybe the Zohar means the kiddush and davening. Elokeinu v'elokei v'seinu, mekadosh Shabbos. He doesn't mean kiddush halakois. What do? Most Hasidim don't say Kivona V'chartu. The Tzanz of the Kloiserberger did say Kivona V'chartu, and that is why I say. But most Hasidim don't. Sephardim don't. The Beis Yosef.
Why Taka did the Tzanzer say? Any reason?
Probably it was the meaning of the Divrei Chaim. And the Divrei Chaim, more than any other Hasidic great, adhered to the Poskim and the Shulchan Aruch. The Divrei Chaim had a son-in-law who was from the Chernobyl Geza, Rav Motele Tversky. was the Rav of Horn's Taipu. And he said, my shver, he said about the Divrei Chaim, was a chassid like the Tanya and a misnaged like the Gra. That is how he described the Divrei Chaim. And the Divrei Chaim, more than any other Hasidic Rebbe, was very adherent. And he was, in the history of Hasidus, no Hasidic Rebbe achieved the status of the Divrei Chaim as the Poisek Hador. Many Hasidic Rebbeim were known to be tremendous Gedolim, like the Chedusharim, the Avnei Nezer. Needless to say, the Tanya, Shulchan Aruch HaRav. But only the Divrei Chaim was considered in his day and age as the Poisek Hador, together with Rabbi Yosef Shlomo Natanzan and Rabbi Shlomo Kluger. So that is typical to the Divrei Chaim. And now, a new approach. The Shittas are gone. We do not find the Goen's Hashkafa in his own words, but we do find it in two important sources. Keserash, Aliyas Eliyahu. I only have the Keserash. Omer Rabbeinu, that's Reb Chaim of Eloshen, the greatest disciple of the Vilna Gaon. Omer Rabbeinu b'Shem Rabbi Yagro. Shazoyer HaKodesh einenu mechulak b'shum mokom im HaGemora. It's impossible, inconceivable. There could be no contradiction between Halacha and Kabbalah. Achen, sho'olim einem yoidim apshat, or b'Gemora or b'Zohar, al ken omrim she'b'chulokim. It is only one din that there might be a difference. But in all the others, there could be no contradiction between Halacha and Kabbalah. Interesting, the Aruch HaShulchan writes, Mikublani, she'i efshar liyas hazohar mechulek megamora elim ken, שגם בגמורה יש פלוגתא. ובמוקר שאין פוסק בגמורה, גם הזוהר יסביר עלי כן. ואילו יש מקום שלא פירשו כאן בזוהר, לא כיוונו אמס, וצורך לפרש פרש שישתווה עם הגמורה. Strange to me why the Aruch HaShulchan doesn't quote the Kohen. What do you mean, כך מקובלני? This Kabbalah is...
It wasn't written, the Goyen didn't write it himself. It was only repeated.
But the only source is the Goen. But anyway, the Aruch HaShulchan echoes the same approach. Now, let me share with you a Tosefes that I have on this. So we went through many sources in the past 2 weeks. Almost in all the sources, the Goen sides with the Ramah against the Zohar, against the B'si Yosef quoting the Zohar. Tefillin and Chalamoyed, they go on sides with the Ramah. We should put on Tefillin, Kriyas HaTorah, always. I think the reason is, according to the Gaon, if we seem to see a contradiction between Halacha and Kabbalah, either you don't understand the Halacha properly, or you don't understand the Kabbalah properly. It is more reasonable to assume that we don't understand Kabbalah than to assume we don't understand Halacha. Because we and our Gedolim are far more versed in Halacha than in Kabbalah. We've been learning Halacha since day one. Many Gedolim weren't versed in Kabbalah at all. You know, the Noida B'Yehuda and the Chassam Sofer write more than once in their Sforim. And on Weissig ben Estars, they definitely knew some of Kabbalah, but many Gedolim weren't giants in Kabbalah as they were in Halacha. So if we do find a contradiction between Halacha and Kabbalah, we should assume that it is the Kabbalah that we don't understand properly and not the Halacha, and that is why we paskin in accordance to the Halacha. So that's my understanding, which is reflected in many sources in the Gaon and Shulchan Aruch, in which he always sides with the Ramah against the B'si Yosef who paskins in accordance to the Zohar. So not like the Marshal and the Ramah says, Halacha always has the upper hand. According to the Gaon, it's not because Halacha is more important than Kabbalah. It is because we are to assume if it's either the Gemara we didn't understand or the Zohar we don't understand, it's more reasonable to assume It's the Kabbalah that got us confused and not the halacha. And that is why we always pass in accordance to halacha. Mishnah Sachasam Sofer. And this will be the culmination of our lengthy discussion. 3 tshuvas and chasam sofer, 2 halachic ones, and 1 which really isn't halachic, but fascinating. Tshuva number 1 deals with shiluach haken. And the basic discussion is, do we do shiluach haken on Shabbos? And then the chasam sofer comes up with a fascinating psak. There is no mitzvah of shiluach haken unless you really want to eat the eggs or eat the little chicklets, whatever they're called, these little birds. So if you want to eat them and you're entitled to eat them and you don't want to cause the mother excessive pain and suffering, send her away. But if you don't want to eat those eggs or birds, then the Chasam Sofer writes, it's midas achzorius. It's cruelty. So many times people come to me and they want to be mechabed me with shiluach haken. And I always try to get out of it. I tell them I have other obligations. I can't do it. I can't come. Because the Chazon Ish sides with the Chasam Sofer. And the Chasam Sofer says it's cruelty. It's wrong. So I always tell people, if you found a nest on your windowsill and you really want to get rid of it because you don't want the birds coming into your house whenever you open the window, and they spread germs and lice. So try to do shiluach haken. But if you take a walk in the woods or in the field and you see a nest, just ignore it. Sheval Tais Adif. Omnam b'shivas chavas yor siyem tam b'shem hazoya b'shiluach haem la'oder yeroles ime ilu al b'neo. Im ken mitzvah lahad haken kedei la'oder rachame ime ilu al b'neo. What if he's a lekem mishum machzorius? Dafil letzorech adam. It's mutter. There is no tzar balchaim. Kol shekin letzorech mitzvah. Achashaz dilan hakocha lo yisvir leihachi. And therefore, el al kocha shaz dilan lo yisvir leikes zoyar. V'yadua heiche de pliga niglem nister ein lo nois stories v'niglois lano. Some Sofer writes, we paskin according to Nigla and not according to Nista. He also has a kasha. If the objective of shiluach haken is to be ma'orer tsar ashchina al beneu shebegolus, so how would we interpret the mitzvah? So what's the mitzvah when we are zeicha to the Beis HaMikdash? The Chasam Sofer didn't see the Zohar. The Zohar is in Tikkun Zohar, Tikkun Vav. The Chasam Sofer only saw the Chavas Yor, and he writes, Tshuvas Chavas Yor tam b'shem Zohar. Because the kasha the Chasam Sofer asks on the Zohar is in that very same section. Tikkun Vav. Rebbe Loza Bereb Shimon asked his father this very same question. And his father answered. And Reb Shimon explained, when we have the Beis HaMikdash and we're not in Golus, the objective of Shiluach HaKen is to be Ma'orer Tzar HaShechina and the Neshama is Ba'olam HaTohu. We don't know exactly what that is. But Reb Shimon addressed this question. But obviously, the Chasam Sofer didn't see the Soya in its original text, only quoted by the Chavas Yor. So this is one tshuva, and now we go over to the next tshuva, Even Ha'ezer. The question he deals with here is an elderly woman. She lived many years with her husband, and they did not have any children.
Can still the further goes further. How is it possible that all the way at the Kufa of Chasam Sofer, he didn't have a copy of Zohar in his house? What's the pshat in this? What's the pasha pshat?
It's not the Zohar, it's Tikkunei HaZohar. And let me tell you what the Tikkunei HaZohar are, if anybody is not aware. There's a Sefer Tikkunei Hazoya, Shivim Tikkunim. So when we sang the songs like Boimer, we sang also Shivu Tikkunim, Yikorim, or Brurim. Tikkunei Hazoya is 70 different pshatim in one word, Bereshis. The entire Sefer, which is a big Sefer, is interpreting one word. First word in Toras Moshe, Bereshis, not even Bara. So either the Chassam Sofer didn't have the Tikkunei Hazoya or he didn't learn Tikkunei Hazoya. I want to tell you something. It is only in our day and age that Kabbalah became so popular. And every other average young man learns Kabbalah. Not everybody is happy about it. My Rebbe, the Kleiser Rebbe, was adamantly against this. In our tradition, going back 100 years, very few people learned Kabbalah. Generally speaking, people were afraid to learn Kabbalah. In our generation, Kabbalah became popular. And let me say this, many young guys who are not successful in learning Gemara turn to Kabbalah. I know many of these young guys. Gemara and HaLachah is far more complex, more difficult. Well, the Tanya writes in Ageres HaKodesh that Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar 13 years spent on Shisha Sidra Mishnah, and they wrote the Zohar and the Tikkunim in 2 or 3 months. I think that's an exaggeration, but that was the Tanya writes. So, the Chassam Sofer writes in many chuvas, only Asik bin stories, and the Noda B'Yehuda writes the same. So maybe they just didn't want to be mefarsim their knowledge in Kabbalah, but it should be no wonder that the Chassam Sofer wasn't entirely familiar with the Zohar or with the Tikkunei Hazoya. So this Zohar specifically is in Tikkun Vav. The Chassam Sofer was aware of the Zohar just from the Chavis Yor. So Chassam Sofer number 2 deals with Chalitza. So this elderly woman said she has no intention to remarry. Does she still need to get Chalitza? The Chassam Sofer says no. Chalitza is the equivalent of a get. An Eishes Ish can't remarry unless she gets a get, which annuls the Kiddushin. And the same goes for Chalitza. She can't remarry until she gets Chalitza. But if this woman has no intention of remarrying, she doesn't need to get Chalitza. He quotes the Rivash, Nachal Shiva, Shneim L'Dover Echad Eschavro, L'Divrei Zohar Parshas Chukas. The Mashmashim Mitzvah B'Chalitza, in any event. The Zohar says that the neshama of the deceased has no menucha until his wife gets Chalitza. But the Chassam Sofer quotes the Knesset Agdolah. Very first source we had last week, the Mishnah Brura. Ein lokaf rinui keminegas divrei hazoya. Ve'im kein bedover she'ein ha'poskim machlokam beferish makonskin kishachaylakim be'edya. Rav says zoya mach mepshita she'ein b'yadeinu lokaf l'kayim divrei hazoya. And therefore he paskins. If the woman wants to take chalitza, tovei brocha aroisha, but we cannot impose on her to take chalitza. So right where we're looking, Hazoya Kosef Sham, she'ein manoach lenefesh hameis ad she'teledu isha me'ochav ben mamala mekoimoi, ve'im lo as tekantoi b'chalitzas hamanel. So the Chassam Sofer does quote the Zohar, and he says, we can't impose the Zohar. And he once again quotes the Knesset Agdolah. Even though here the Zohar is machmir, but nevertheless, we can't impose. Last source, which is really a quote and a saying. It is quite common in the Chassam Sofer that the Sofer quotes himself. First of all, he writes very powerfully about the importance of minhagim. And then, v'chein ani oima, kol ha'ma'arav divrei Kabbalah ma'alochas ha'psukos, chai mishum zorei ha'klayim, pen tukdash ha'maleo hazera asher tisla. One should not confuse Kabbalah with halacha. Kabbalah lachud, halacha lachud. Lo mezoisa ma'arav sifrei hagoyenim divrei Torah. He means philosophy. Over al choirish shor b'chamor yachto. He doesn't specify who's the shor and who's the chamor. He leaves that for us to guess. And it's not hard to guess. The shor is part of the Markava, Kisei HaKoved of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One of the four faces in the Kisei HaKoved is the shor. The chamor is a chamor. What do we have to say about a donkey? So if you confuse halacha with Kabbalah, you're over on Zorea Kalayim Bekerem. If you confuse philosophy with halacha, you're over on Loi Tachlis B'Shor V'Chamor. Ve'emu manig Yisrael, manig B'Kalayim Loika. So that's a saying. The Minchas Elazar was the Munkat HaRav. Munkat HaRav was Hasidic master, Munkat Hasidim. My father saw the Minchas Elazar twice as a child. He learned the Munkat, but that was after the demise of the Minchas Elazar. So the Minchas Elazar was a Godel B'Yisrael and Nigla. 4 volumes, Shalas Chuvas. But it's very obvious in his Chuvas that he's a Hasidic Rebbe, and he always wages the wars of Hasidim. And he attacks the Chassam Sofer. How could the Chassam Sofer write, one shouldn't confuse halacha and Kabbalah? The Beis Yosef paskin so many halachas al pi hazoyar. And I really don't identify with the Minchas Elazar at all. The Chassam Sofer was aware of the Piska Beis Yosef, but those are exceptions. There are approximately 15 seifim in Shulchan Aruch which are based on Zohar. I have no idea how many seifim there are in Shulchan Aruch because I don't waste my time on academic research. Probably in 10 seconds you could find it on a computer, I don't know. But I guess against those 15 seifim that are based on the Zohar, there are thousands of seifim which are pure halacha. So yes, the Chassam Sofer writes, one should not confuse halacha and Kabbalah. The Beis Yosef sometimes decided to bring the Zohar into the Beis HaMedrash. Those are exceptions. And the Chassam Sofer actually quotes the Knesset Agdolah that is quoted by the Magen Avraham as well. Halacha and Kabbalah are 2 different realms. And one should not impose Kabbalah on the masses. So, the Minchas Elazar writes, last 4 lines, first paragraph. כל אלה יאמרו שהם זורעים בקליים חס ושלום ומחילס כבוי תרוסוי גאוינו בציקוסוי פולטו קורמוסוי דרך צחס משם סייפה דבורוב. Because he wants to attack the philosophers, he felt he needs to attack the Mekabolim as well. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. The Minchas Elazar says, the Magen Avraham quotes Dari, but the same Magen Avraham quotes the Knesset Agdolah. Same Magen Avraham. I don't see any problem. I don't see any contradiction. Yes, the Beis Yosef sometimes paskins in accordance to the Zohar, but that is a mi'uta, the mi'uta, the mi'uta, the mi'uta. Generally speaking, Kabbalah and halacha should not be confused. And I don't see any problem with this Chassam Sofer firmly following the tradition of Gedolei Ashkenaz, quoting the Knesset Agdolah, and it doesn't even contradict the Beis Yosef. This is more or less what Rav Wosner writes. Last source on our sheet is the Shevet Aleini, Chelik Aleph, Siman Beis. Beautiful language. And An v'oyim shedivrach l'soif v'karur nehem le'enayim v'ksuvim b'yesodis ha'chachma.
Last two lines on the page. Yeah.
Yeah, the last two lines on this page. B'mchilas kvoi teros agon atzadik hamasek divrei moram pshutim. Lo rak b'teres hanigla v'anisteros al. Even in Teres Anista, we won't get into the difference between the Ramak and the Riyah Kodesh. They were contemporaries. The Ramak was Reb Moshe Kordavairo. He was a Talmud of the Shitta Mekabetzes. He was older than the Ari. And his Shitta in Kabbalah is in Paradis Ramayim. I think, but once again, I'm not a researcher. I think the biggest sefer ever written since the Shas is the Paradis Ramayim. And that is the Kabbalah of the Ramak, of Reb Moshe Kordavairo. My guess is that the Paradis Ramayim is the biggest sefer ever composed. Bein benigla, bein benista. And the Kabbalah of the Ramak is somewhat different than Kabbalah Sari. After the Ari, all the Makabolam followed the Ari. And they set aside the Kabbalah of the Pardes Ramonim of the Ramak. So Rav Osner writes, and he brings sources that we shouldn't even confuse the Ramak and the Ramo. And it's Pashut because these are two different opinions which don't have the same approach. So you cannot take them both. So let's have a look at the last paragraph.
What did the Rav mean that this is the biggest sefer since Shas?
I mean to say the biggest in quantity.
Uh-huh.
It's just the biggest work. It's the biggest sefer, bigger than the Mishnah Torah Rambam, probably the biggest piece of literature ever written is the Ramak, Paradis Ramayim. But it's just a guess. I won't be surprised if people come up with some internet sources that I'm mistaken. You know, I'm a primitive person. I only know what I learned. I only know what my eyes saw. I'm not a researcher and I'm not into technology, but it's my guess. It's my feeling for many years. I'll be happy to learn if I'm right or wrong. But Rav Osner clearly and beautifully explains, yes, there are exceptions. And only giants like the Beis Yosef knew when to bring the Zohar into the Beis HaMedrash. But as a general rule, Kabbalah is Kabbalah and Halacha is Halacha. What do we do when we have a Shaila? What are the first sources we check? Mishnah, Gemara, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. That is the halachic process. And therefore, the Chassam Sofer is very clear when he writes, we should not confuse Kabbalah and halacha. Sometimes they interact. But you need to be a giant like the Beis Yosef to decide when we base a psak on Kabbalah. As a general rule, we should not confuse Kabbalah and halacha. And therefore, I think the asag of the Minchas Elazar is unwarranted, not called for, and doesn't carry much weight. So I hope these two shiurim were interesting. To me, it's a fascinating sugya. And as I mentioned a few times, I could make the final version of what I wrote available to everybody about Chabura. It's not even ready yet. I just sent Beinish this afternoon some additional sources. But in a day or two, we'll have the final version, which is based on about 35 different sources. So, Yagdil, Torah, V'Yadia. Hope to see you next week.
Yeah, Shakayach Kvei Rav. Thank you very much for the unbelievable two shiurim. We'll be in touch to discuss next week.